If I told you that I was running late this morning to church, which I was, and that I flew here, you would know that I did not mean that I sprouted wings and flew here. Unless I use my plane, which I'm still waiting for. Some other people will hear some of the miracles, and for Christian fundamentalists, this is especially true for miracles attributed to Jesus, and they will say, I know it sounds unlikely, I know it sounds improbable, but it did happen to our guy back there. And this is what is called the uniqueness option. In the pre-Copernican world, and even especially before the evolution became, at least by most people, to be an accepted fact of the cosmos, it was not hard to believe, it was fairly accepted that divine beings could come down from above, have sex with humans, and sire divine creatures. Caesar was considered divine, and it was believed that when he died, he rose from his funeral pyre into the heavens above, and he was considered to be the savior of the world, and he was considered to be the Prince of Peace. He was given those titles, which is why when the followers of Jesus gave those titles to Jesus, the Roman people got really upset about that. Now, if you and I had been living in that world, and an amazing number of people seem like they still do, at least when it comes to religious beliefs, and we had heard that Jesus had been born of a virgin, or that he had walked on water, or that he'd been raised from the dead, our likely response to that would have been, that's cool. That's cool. So what? Out of all the gods available to me, what does this one have to offer that Diana doesn't? And I think I'll stay at the temple of Diana because they have better coffee and sacred cookies. So here's a fact, and I'll bet you many Christian fundamentalists simply don't know this. The word miracle that we have come to know as a supernatural intervention into a world governed by natural laws, the word miracle does not appear in the Bible. When Jesus does something that is out of the ordinary, it's called a mighty deed or a deed of power. And what we're dealing with when we begin to look at the miracle stories attributed to Jesus is how his early followers, who were still connected to an oral tradition about Jesus, began to see him. So where did all the miracles come from? Actually, there are not that many. But I want to talk about the history of what has come to be known as the miraculous. And I want to provide both religious and spiritual literacy in my talks. So I'm calling this talk Magic, Miracles, Metaphors, and Meaning. And next Sunday will probably be part 2. So how and why did magic and the miraculous work their way into human consciousness? What is the history of the miraculous? So to get an answer to that question, let me ask you, you've been coming here, most of you, for a while. What does your teacher think is the primary purpose for people such as ourselves? You're going to be asked this when you go to heaven. And everybody in this space, people who are watching us being streamed live now, people who will watch this video later, people who hear the podcast, every single one has met the primary survival needs of life. We're not currently in a war-torn country, though at times it feels like it. One of the lecturers we heard on our trip to the Balkans said, you who live in the United States have no way to identify with what it means to be given the choice between something to eat, and freedom of speech. We don't have that struggle in this country. Most of us have access to our own mode of transportation. Most of us have more than one pair of shoes. Most of us know what's going to be for dinner tonight and so forth. And that puts us in a minority of people who live on this planet. 5% of the people who live on this globe have those things. Now, we don't think of that very often. So since these are not the things that drive us for meaning, why are we here? Why are you here? I think one of the great things about the Mankind Project is it helps men get clarity about why are you here? What's your meaning? What's your purpose in this life? And what we are free to do, and our primary purpose, is that you and I are free to devote ourselves to psychological and spiritual growth. And if you take your lead in here from me, a lot of your homework in this area has already been done for you. We are free to commit ourselves to growing in freedom and love, to grow in experiencing and embodying and expressing those values I keep harping on of peace, love, joy, non-judgmentalness or patience, and humility. And you can't embody those unless you have, unless you have a spiritual practice. You need a daily practice to be able to embody those, to have a way to keep them in front of you, to be reminded of them. Now, if you're a parent, you know that children don't come into the world with many skills. It takes a long time for the human animal to move from early infancy through the various stages of childhood, adolescence, and then into adulthood. When I was in training, we were taught early on, given models that we didn't have available to us now. We had Erik Erikson and we had a number of other developmental models, but we're taught generally that there were 8 stages of human development. Early infancy was the first and late elderhood was the last. And everybody gets to experience those too. Those are not optional. Everybody gets born, and if we're lucky, everybody's going to make it into late elderhood or close to death, right? But the others are not guaranteed. So that right now, most of our culture is at late adolescent development. It's not guaranteed that you will continue to grow. So just as a parent would not expect a 2-year-old to be able to do calculus, just so wise leadership in the human society would not expect its ethos, mores, fashions, and life or death political decisions to be made by people with arrested moral and ethical development. But that is precisely where we are, globally. Now, there are many models of human development, both individual and group, available that you can use as a yardstick. And over the years, I have offered many of those to you. Piaget, moral development, Kohlberg. I talked recently about Jim Fowler's faith development. For the purpose of this talk today, I want to use another model that some of you may or may not be familiar with, and it's the model called spiral dynamics. I'm not going to do this class is not about spiral dynamics. But just as all children start in infancy and proceed through an order of developmental stages to reach adulthood, unless one is a prodigy, you don't skip any of these. And societies move through these developmental stages as well. Now, the reason this is called spiral dynamics is because the graphic is that there is an ever-expanding spiral staircase that goes from very narcissistic, which a child has to be, to a broader developmental space in later life. So we all start at stage 1. We're driven by instinct, by the need to survive. This is a very egocentric starting point. It has to be. And at this stage, we do not have the cognitive ability to see things from somebody else's point of view. And though they may develop in some other ways, sociopaths and narcissists stay arrested at this stage the rest of their lives. They never develop. And they never develop the capacity to be empathetic, to see something from someone's point of view. Human beings probably spend the first 18 months of their life here. The human race was here about 100,000 years ago. And then there comes the next stage. For humans, this is ages, say, 1 to 3. For the human race, it'll be in about 50,000 years ago. It's called the magical animistic stage. And here's the stage where if a child holds a blanket in front of him or herself to play peep-eye, they don't think you've disappeared. They think they've disappeared. Peep-eye, right? So this at the collective human developmental stage is the stage where people believe they can fashion a doll and stick a pin in it and it will affect somebody else. That's like voodoo, like magic in that sense. And in this stage of human development, there are magical spirits that existed all around. Some of them were good, some of them were bad. This was a time when tribal identity really grew strong. Kinship was very important here. Lineage was very important here. And it's on the cusp between this developmental stage and the next that these magical tribal powers get projected outward onto gods who lived in the world above the earth. You with me? Get projected outward. So heroes come on the stage here. They're real or they're imagined. Stories are told about them that people don't bother to think about whether they're literally true. They were true in their frame of reference. They didn't think of literal nature as we do. So for the human, we should be getting to the end of the stage about age 6. And the next stage, which is called the later mythic, began for the human race about 5,000 years ago. And here's where meaning and purpose is defined by an all-powerful other. Here's where gods, or God, or meaning begins to take place. People on earth, at least some of them, can access these gods and speak for them or speak in behalf of them. And so you have a group of people who are set aside, which is what the word ordained means. They're set aside and they become shamans, witch doctors, priests of some kind because they have special access to the gods. Now, this, as I said, class is not about spiral dynamics, so I'm going to kind of leave it behind. But I would point out a couple things about that I think are very, very relevant. If our primary purpose is growth, psychologically and spiritually, it's helpful to know that there are other developmental stages on the spiral dynamic thing. There are other levels that we can shoot for, that we can aspire to. Social psychologists are saying that we achieved the state that we're in now about 30 years ago. Some say we've still got a very long, long way to go. And each stage that we go through, collectively and individually, contributes something to the next stage. And as Ken Wilber says, in healthy psychological spiritual development, we are aware that we transcend and include the stage before. We don't reject it. We don't judge it. We transcend and include. Now, where something went awry is that in cognitive development that had the capacity to go beyond magic, instead of putting magic aside, it got transferred to these supernatural beings. These beings did not know how to do magical things. These beings did know how to do magical things, and what's more, they would do them for you if You did what was necessary to appease the God, whatever that was. And that's been different things at different times in the development of the human race. So, starting about 10,000 years ago, all around the globe, human beings began this search for the one true, correct way to approach and appease or please these powerful beings. And it became a matter of life and death. Sometimes a matter of eternal life and eternal death. Heaven and hell. Now, a Christian version of the mythic literal stage of development believes that every word in the Bible is literally true, or some version thereof. It believes that God, through Moses, literally parted the Red Sea, and that Lot's wife really turned into a pillar of salt. Now, at this stage, there's a very strong intergroup identity, creating multiple opportunities for us versus them. So you get things like, my group is special, your group isn't. My group has the truth, your group doesn't. All other groups are infidels, non-believers, bound for hell, and are evil. As a matter of fact, evil enough to kill right here, right now. Okay? So right now, much of our world is stuck at this level. Now, there is much more that we can learn from and profit from the spiral dynamic model. As I said, that's not my purpose. I'll point out that the great spiritual systems that developed still perform some very important functions, and I'm going to talk about those at length next week. But I just want to point out now that they were involved with not changing belief systems, not changing levels of awareness. These levels of awareness created containers that were not powerful enough to change the container itself. You following what I'm saying? So that in the church where I grew up, they were really good people, loving people. And the Baptist tradition had this very intense commitment to what they call foreign missions, to sending missionaries to Africa to convert people to save their souls so that they would go to heaven when they died instead of hell. And at the same time did not have the awareness to reach out to people of color in their own community. They taught the Good Samaritan story. They taught the golden rule. They taught love your neighbor. They just didn't do it. And there was no problem. Just want to point that out. Now, put your thinking caps on and pay real close attention to this paragraph, and then I'm going to do something lighter. It's so simple. This stuff is so simple. Magical thinking in a wide variety of forms has been a universal response to the creation in which we humans have found ourselves. It more often than not took some religious form in a ritual or shamanistic sense, and then when there was what some refer to as an actual axial shift, that's when monotheism, Hinduism, Buddhism came into consciousness. A distinction came into being where this magical thinking was sanctioned by mainstream religious doctrines as miracles. Magic stayed rooted at a very early stage of development, sort of like folk wisdom. And what you just heard was less than a 100-word summary of 100,000 years of human history. Okay. This week I read these words by Angel Kyoto Williams. She is, by the way, the second African-American Zen teacher in the history of the world. She said, I have a profound responsibility to support your transformation, to make sure you are living the most honored, respected, whole life possible, because if you aren't, I cannot. If you aren't, it is simply not possible for me to do so, because we are connected. we are one. Now, this sort of thing has been said by other great religious teachers, Jesus, Buddha, Gandhi. And it reflects a higher development on the spiral dynamic thing. It's a transcendent kind of view that we are all one. We are all connected. And I believe with the Dalai Lama that if we could get that, if we could embrace that we are really brothers and sisters, that we are all part of the same big drop of water, we'd quit killing each other. Now, for us to move up on the spiral dynamic level, we're probably going to have to give miracles up. To believe in a world where miracles can or do occur means that the world is in the hands of a capricious deity, and that the task of religion is to manipulate this God somehow to gain favorable treatment for ourselves usually. And this, I think, is a superstitious understanding of life and the sacred. So what the discovery of the Big Bang has led to, and there's been more than one Big Bang, not literally, but there have been many nodal points in human conscious development that would look like a Big Bang. Since the Big Bang and since the reality of evolution has hit us, we know that we live in an ordered cosmos. There's no God standing in the wings out there who's going to come rescue us if we get in trouble. However, miracles have always been part of the faith story, and magic has always been part of the human story. So my question is, what will be left? We're between two stories. What will be left, or what will be waiting if we leave miracles behind? So somebody's thinking he's going to get struck by lightning just any second now. So how did miracles come to be part of the biblical story? Now, they're in Buddhism, they're in Hinduism, the Zen tradition teaches a lot about spirits and ancestors and a lot of things. Native American tradition certainly does that. First Nation people's religion certainly does that. I'm focusing because I'm trying to embody and follow the teacher Jesus. How did miracles get in our story? And so I've given a bit of historical background. Now I'm going to focus on the Christian Bible specifically. Most people think that there might be a miracle on every page of the Bible, but there's not. Miracle stories are told only about certain Jewish heroes. And there are no miracle stories associated with the prophets. There are no miracle stories in the wisdom literature. No miracle stories in the Psalms, in the Song of Psalms. No miracle stories. Once you get past the Exodus, and once you get past the Torah being given to Moses, the rest of the Hebrew Scripture is pretty much absent of miracles. Now, there are 3 exceptions that we'll talk about. So the notion that the Bible is just packed with miracles is not true. Miracle stories in the Hebrew Scriptures are always associated with a Jewish hero and with that hero's successor. So we're beginning now today to look at Moses, and Moses' successor would be Joshua. And then next week we'll look at a couple of more. Moses' life is marked by miraculous events. You know, it starts off with, I guess Moses being rescued out of the bulrushes is kind of a miracle, right? But he is tending his father-in-law's sheep, and he sees a bush that's burning, and the bush is not burning up. And furthermore, there is a voice that comes out of the bush and says to Moses, "Moses, take off your shoes," because everybody knows this story. You're standing on holy ground. So let me just put in here something that I do believe about miracles. And I got this from one of my favorite little clips from Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She says, "Earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only he who sees his shoes, takes off his shoes, The rest sit around and pluck blackberries. The world is filled with the miraculous. It's just our ability to see, right? I love this poem. So after the burning bush story, there is a series of absolutely bizarre acts that are designed to convince Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go. Now, if you have ever seen one of the most embarrassing movies ever made, an Old Testament professor of mine was a consultant on this movie, and he was so proud of it. And I went to see it in Dallas when it came out, I think in 1950 something, right? It had to be the 50s. And I went, oh my God. So bad. So in an effort to impress Pharaoh about his ability, you know that Moses took his staff and threw it down on the ground, and it turned into a snake. And Pharaoh called his magicians, and they could do the same trick. Now, actually, I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but the translation of the Hebrew in that story is Moses' staff turned into a little dragon, not a snake. But when they translated the King James Version, little dragon didn't make any sense. It's little dragon in the Hebrew story because one of the Egyptian gods was the crocodile. And they wanted to have something that would stand up to the crocodile. Well, Pharaoh's guys could do that. I'll tell you another one that you probably didn't know. Everybody knows Joseph's coat of many colors. That's not what it says. In the Hebrew, it says that Joseph's father gave him a coat with long sleeves. But in England, where the King James Version was translated, everybody had coats with long sleeves, so they wanted it to stand out, so they made it a coat of many colors. So, might as well get the truth out here. So Pharaoh was unconvinced after the snake. So Moses took his hand and put it in his robe, and when he took it out, it had turned leprous, which is the dreaded curse of that day. And then he put it back in his cloak and took it out. It was healed. Great magic trick. And Pharaoh's magicians could do the same thing. So after this, Moses was empowered by God to conjure up plague after plague to force the Egyptians to free the Hebrew people from bondage. The Nile River was turned to blood. All the fish died. As a consequence, all the water supplies in Egypt, creeks, ponds, rivers, streams became blood. Turned out Pharaoh's magicians could do that one too. Then came the plague of frogs that covered Egypt. Again, Pharaoh's magicians could do that one too. And then came a plague of gnats, which stumped Pharaoh's magicians. They couldn't do that. They couldn't do the gnats. Then all the Egyptian cattle got sick and died, which is followed by plagues of boils, hail, locusts, and darkness. Now, folks, this is grim stuff. This is not a Sunday school picnic that we are observing here. Now, you got to keep in mind that all these stories were written down 300 years after the historical Moses. How good is your memory? 300 years worth? So none of this convinced Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go. So God did one other terrifying act. God sent the angel of death throughout the land of Egypt to murder, it's the only word you can use, the firstborn son of every Egyptian household. Now again, this is not a God you want to meet on a dark street some night. The homes of all the Hebrew children were spared because they had smeared blood above their doorposts, and the angel of death passed over these houses, thus giving us the name of a great religious holiday in both Judaism and Christianity called Passover. And that did it. That got the Egyptians to let the slaves have their freedom. I have every year for like 50 years participated in or constructed and led a Seder meal service. We usually do it on Maundy Thursday after the worship service here. The Seder meal is not a religious service. The word Seder simply means order, as in an order of service. We have an order in which things are done. And it's this meal which is served to the extended Jewish family, at which the elders tell the story that I just told you about how the children of Israel experienced freedom. It is a powerful story. It's a story. It's a story about freedom. And its relevancy is to raise the question, are there people who are not free today? And do we, in some way, find ourselves complicit in their not being free? Are there ways in which we are not free, in which we are kept in bondage? What are those? Can we talk about them? And around the table, the children ask 4 questions about, why is this night different from other nights? Why do we eat the kind of food that we do? What gives us our traditional identity and history and meaning? It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. And if you stop and take any level of the story literally, you're going to miss the overall power it has to pick us up and put us on a path to freedom. Just look around today at the people who are not free. Now, I want to invite you to pay attention to the reactions you have had to what you've heard today. For some of you, this is nothing new. For others of you, perhaps it is. You might be relieved to be hearing this sort of stuff. Maybe you're intrigued. Maybe you're discomforted. Maybe you find this, if it's new information and you like it, you may find it blissful. You may go, oh man, it's so freeing. That's what the word nirvana means, by the way. Or perhaps you are certain that because I teach this material, I am going to hell, and you will come with me if you believe it too. I just want to assure you that it is not my desire to debunk or destroy biblical teaching. I want to reclaim them. I want to reveal them as the reservoirs of living water that they are. I also want to reclaim Jesus and set him free from the confines of Western Christian fundamentalism. But our reaction when we are invited to leave the old for the new can show us how much in the grip of the old we are. So I want to invite you to approach your and our spiritual future with as few assumptions as possible, no matter where they came from, no matter how long you've held them. My experience growing up as Southern Baptist is that you don't ever get past that in some ways. You're always recovering from it, like being a cradle Catholic. But just leave your assumptions at the door when you come in. You can pick them up again when you leave. Just don't let what you assume block what we're looking for as a way of experience the world in which we will be open, like Elizabeth Browning was, to experiencing the transcendental everywhere. And we can't do that unless we let go and commit ourselves to growth. My focus is on the inner work that can help us navigate this time. Now, one of the essential ingredients for this work is respect. Something that is glaringly missing in our national conversation. Respect. The word respect means to look at again. Respect. Inspect, you look into. Respect, you look at again. I respect you. I'm going to take a second look at you. Both liberals and conservatives are guilty of behaving with a lack of respect. Conservatives, in an effort to hang on to what they think they've lost or are losing, are guilty of this. And liberals, in looking down on those who think they have not progressed as far as they have, are guilty of this. But if you look at the great spiritual leaders of the world, Buddha, Jesus, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, St. Francis, they embody what they're teaching. They are disrespectful of no one. Now, that doesn't mean they're weak. It doesn't mean they're patsies. There's a story told about Gandhi when he was studying law at University College in London. He had a Caucasian professor whose name was Peters, and Professor Peters just absolutely hated Gandhi very intensely. It was a result of his prejudice and animosity toward him simply because he was Indian and a British subject. But Gandhi would never lower his head, never bow to him as they were expected to do. And because of that, there was conflict between these two guys. One day, Professor Peters was having lunch in the dining room in the university, and Gandhi came and set his tray down next to him. And Professor Peters turned to him and said, "Mr. Gandhi, you do not understand. A pig and a bird do not eat together." And Gandhi took his tray and got up and said, "Never mind, Professor Peters, I will fly away." Professor Peters was enraged and decided to take revenge on the next test paper, but Gandhi passed it brilliantly, and Professor Peters, unhappy and frustrated, asked him a question. He said, "Mr. Gandhi, if you were walking down the street and found a package and within was a bag of wisdom and another with a bag of money, which one would you take?" And Gandhi said, "The money." And Professor Peters was smiling sarcastically and said, "I, in your place, would have taken wisdom, don't you think?" And Gandhi just shrugged and said, "Well, each one takes what he doesn't have." So by this time, Peters was beside himself, and so great was his anger that he wrote the word idiot on Gandhi's exam paper and gave it to Gandhi, and Gandhi took it back to his desk and sat there for a few minutes, and then he later got up and went to the professor and he said, "Professor Peters, you signed this, but you didn't give me a grade." The truth and point of that story is the way we behave is far more important than what we believe. Once Buddha was threatened with death by a bandit, and the bandit raised his sword to Buddha, and Buddha said, "Wait, before you do that, grant me my dying wish. Cut the limb off that tree." And so the bandit took his sword and whack, cut the tree off. And the bandit said, "All right, now what?" And Buddha said, "Put it back." And the bandit said, "You must be crazy, think I can do that." And Buddha said, "On the contrary, it is you who are crazy to think that you are mighty because you can wound and destroy. That's the task of children. The mighty know how to create and heal." That's a miracle, creating and healing. May our culture, may our world learn this. May we contribute to creating and healing. Okay. Had enough? No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this: you carry precious cargoes, so watch your step, and I hope to see you here next week. Thank you.